Alright, this is like my third time trying to record this video, which is way more thought and effort that should ever be put into anything concerning Redo of Healer. Redo of Healer is a terrible ripoff of Shield Hero. I've tried in past recordings of this video to make that a more subtle point, but it always ends up going there. It's terrible. I hate it. And I don't want to give you the impression that I hate it because the reasons everybody else hates it. I don't care that it depicts sexual violence. I think there should always be a place in media for depictions of sexual violence. I think it's perfectly fine and perfectly healthy to have a place through fiction to explore those themes, for there to be distance between the actions taken and the audience, so they can explore them in a way that can't damage them in any physical way. I think that's perfectly fine. I don't even have a problem with pieces of media who have main characters who are rapists. I just don't have an issue with it. I think we as a culture are perfectly fine with main characters who are so many other shades of terrible person. We're perfectly fine with serial killers, stalkers, manipulators, pedophiles. We're perfectly fine with narratives containing so many other brand of terrible people. So rape is not personally where I draw the line for what I don't want to see in a main character. Of course, that sort of thing is subjective, differs from person to person, but Lolita is one of my favorite books, You is one of my favorite TV series, and Dexter I watched religiously from the age of 12 to 16. So my psychology is a little fucked up. And Redo of Healer insults me at every possible turn. It insults my intelligence, and it insults the very idea of having original thoughts. Let's start with the main character. Kearu is ostensibly motivated by his desire for revenge, except for when he isn't. By the end of episode 2, Kearu's revenge is pretty much complete. He's taken out whatever he needs to do on the princess character, he brainwashes her, and he basically just keeps her around as a meat puppet for the rest of the series. And you just can't make the argument that she's anything more than that. She's a sex slave. She just is. She's not a character. Freya, from that point onward, is just a groupie who Kearu keeps around as a morality pet. She has no logical threads connecting her character together. She is purely there for the sake of pleasuring Kearu. There's a particularly instructive moment in episode 3 where Freya's like, when they go get the slave, because that's what they did in Shield Hero, where Freya's like, hey, slavery's bad, and Kearu's like, I don't care, and she's like, okay, well, I tried, and then they just move past it. This moment, taken in stride, just in a plain viewing, wouldn't really jump out to a regular viewer, but it jumped out to me because there's no reason for Freya to think slavery is bad. You know, she's only really, in this incarnation, she's only been alive for a week at that point? She's just been following around Kearu, and slavery's legal in this town, so there's no moral or cultural reason for her to find slavery abhorrent. They just aren't there. Freya finds slavery evil because we, in the real world, understand slavery to be evil, and we need moral grounding in the world. That's it. There is no in-world reason for her to think that, because there is no in-world reason for anything. There is no world building. There's nothing. There just isn't. The world of Redo of Healer is not an internally consistent place. There is not a magic system, because you're just supposed to understand it as base RPG fantasy magic system. The healing mechanic just makes no internal logic. Healing is used as a catch-all term for both healing and disease and destruction and facial reconfiguration and memory wiping and memory stealing. Healing is basically just a catch-all term for anything it needs to be in the moment to drive the plot forward. Which I think is sad, because I think the idea of a healer who has to see the memories of the people he heals, and for whom healing is viscerally difficult, is a very interesting idea. I think that's fascinating. But it isn't explored at all, because anything interesting that could be done with that premise is already done by the time this story starts, because Kaoru is on his second go-around of life, and anything interesting that could be done with that concept would have to be explored in the first go-around. Because it's not about the world, it's not about the plot, it's not about Kaoru's motivations. It's about generic isekai power fantasy. This show qualifies as an isekai. It doesn't matter that the main character isn't from another world, it qualifies as isekai. It has all the trappings of isekai. Kaoru has no motivation. Vengeance does not work as a motivation for him, because by the end of episode 2, his vengeance is basically over, and the threat is dropped for the next 4 episodes. In episode 3, he picks up a slave and does her side quest for the next 2 episodes. In episode 5, he's confronted by the swordsman or whatever, and, spends half the runtime of that episode doing his thing with her. We don't have to discuss it, doesn't matter, it's not important to this discussion. In episode 6, Leonard, another enemy from his past, shows up and he takes care of Leonard. Vengeance is not a defining character trait of Kaoru, because nothing is a defining character trait of Kaoru. Kaoru is technically like a recovering heroin addict, but that doesn't inform his character at all. Kaoru has no weird feelings toward medicine or drugs or alcohol throughout the show, because his backstory isn't his backstory, it's set dressing. It's a D&D character backstory thrown onto him as vague justification for the actions he does. So, we brush past vengeance as one of his character motivations. So what are we left with? Maybe Kaoru just wants to be needlessly cruel, which I think would be an interesting character motivation. You don't see that a lot in fantasy or isekai and anime. Just a character who wants to be base cruel to the world around him. But that doesn't work as a motivation for him either, because in episode 3, when he gets his slave, he helps his slave out for no reason, no personal gain, unless you want to make the argument that he's manipulating her just to get her body. I don't think that's a good argument to make, because Kaoru says straight up that he's just not doing it for any reason. He's just like, I'll just do it because I want to. In episode 4, he says, oh, my vengeance has aesthetic. Oh, I don't harm people who don't harm me first. While cleaving through literally hundreds of just regular ass soldiers. And he justifies it by saying, oh, but this is Setsuna's vengeance, so I can go all out as I want. So his motivations don't matter. He's not an internally consistent character. In episode 6, one of his enemies is revealed to be a rapist, and Kaoru takes thematic justice out on him by turning his enemy into a woman and having his posse gang rape him. Which is what happens in episode 6. I don't know if you've seen episode 6, but that happens. That's just a thing that occurs. Kaoru is a Frankenstein abomination of the main character of Shield Hero. He buys a slave in episode 3 because that's what the Shield Hero did. But when it happened in The Rising of the Shield Hero, it happened because the main character in that story doesn't have any offensive capabilities. He is pure defense and he needs DPS in order to survive. So there is character and plot motivation for him to go out and get a slave. When it happens in Redo of Healer, it happens because that's what happened in Shield Hero. When I already forgot his name, when Kayura or whatever, Kagara, I don't know. When Caliente gets a when Caliente gets a slave, it's because that's what the Shield Hero did. When Caliente is nice to his slave, it's because that's what the Shield Hero did. When he's ruthlessly capitalistic and selling the cure of that one thing or whatever to the village, he's doing that because that's what the Shield Hero did. He is a classic case of having your cake and raping it too. He has no internal motivations, he is not internally consistent, he is nothing. There is nothing to Kayura. He is not a character, he is a meat puppet for the author to parade around as an audience surrogate to play out all their weird power fantasies through. Freya is not a character, she's a cardboard cutout of a vagina. Setsuna is given a character, and that's immediately destroyed because after 2 episodes her motivation is taken care of and she devotes herself to Kayura from then on. Back when Shield Hero was originally airing, I stopped watching the anime run because it had bad CG in it and I just didn't want to see it, and I switched instead to the manga. And the manga rip I was reading at the time was cleaned up and typeset by a fan, and she would add these like little asides, these little comic representations of herself every couple chapters, every time the main character did something cool or was discriminated against, anytime she wanted to represent her emotions towards the main character, because she loved the main character of Shield Hero so much. When there was an injustice against him, her little, comic, I'm thinking about it, and I remember it was really cute. Anytime there was an injustice against him, her comic representation would get mad. Anytime he did something cool, there'd be like hearts in her eyes. It was adorable. And I can't imagine that happening for Kayura. Not only because of the actions he takes, but because he's not a character. He's just nothing. Nobody. A waste of time and space and energy. There is nothing to Redo of Healer. There's no plot, no characters, no world. It is a Frankenstein abomination of other shows, other better shows. If you wanted a fantasy story, you could go watch ReZero. If you wanted moral ambiguity, you could go watch Shield Hero. If you wanted a fantasy story in which the main character gets down and dirty, you could go read like 8 different doujins I can think of off the top of my head. The only thing this is here for is to be all these things in one. Just as aesthetic, as set dressing, as genre, so you don't have to put critical thought into the media you consume, because Redo of Healer collapses under an iota of thought. It's nothing for nobody. Even trying to have discussions of depictions of rape in media and fantasy would be insulting to the idea, because Redo of Healer is not media. It's like trying to eat air. I despise that I even have to think about it. It would be so much better if it was just a bad show, or even if it was just insulting by being bad depictions of these things in anime. But it's not. Redo of Healer is a nothing show because it's scared. I don't know how you start with the premise of main character who rapes and destroy it by being scared of originality. I'm gonna fucking go read Shield Hero. I'm so mad, bro. Thank you and good night.